Hi, my name is Bob and welcome back to the homestead, y'all. Well, it's the morning after. Well, it's about 11 o'clock the morning after. It's still 35 degrees out. The wind's blowing 7 to 10 mile an hour, so that takes the wind chill down into the 20s. And luckily last night it didn't get as cold as they were forecasting it to. They were forecasting 21 degrees for a low, and we only got down to 24 degrees, and that was just for a short period of time when I looked at my weather station this morning. I still am concerned because we got down below freezing by 10 o'clock last night. By 11 o'clock it was at 29 degrees. So that means that it stayed in the 20s for several hours throughout the night. By coming out and looking this morning, you can't tell a whole lot of damage on some of our trees. I've looked at some of the fruit trees up in the orchard, and you can tell, especially on the cherry trees, all the open flowers, or most of them, are wilted. Luckily, several days ago, those were being pollinated by bees, and I've checked a few of them, and I'll show you what they look like when we go up there here in a minute. But these are our blueberries. Right now, the blueberries look fine. Like I said, these blooms weren't open yesterday. If you didn't get to see that video, I'll put the link in the description that I did yesterday. Most of them aren't open. There was a few that were open. Just by looking at them this morning, they look okay, but truly we won't know for several days, maybe even a week, when we start watching these blooms and seeing if they're dying off or if they continue to open up. Now, if these blooms continue to open up, say in 3 or 4 days they start to open up, then they should be fine. But the ones that the freeze killed, well, what they'll do is they'll die off. They won't open up. Those blooms won't open up. Like I said, we stayed in the 20s for several hours before the sun came up, and that concerns me because that's generally when you have a problem, when you have a long freeze. Generally in the springtime, this time of year, if we have a freeze, it's the last couple hours before daylight, and it's not as hard on the plants, especially if they've been acclimated the day before or a couple days before. It doesn't hurt them quite as bad. But these are still full of blooms. Now, some of my late bloomers back there, they're just now starting to put blooms on. They all look great. They don't have any black spots on them. And not many of these leaves have black spots on them. But like I said, it'll take a day or two before we can tell whether they're gonna make it or not. But I'll update you on that. Probably one day next week, we'll come back out here, we'll look, and we'll see if some of these blooms are starting to open up or see if they froze and they're gonna die off. But I'll bring the camera closer, I'll show you some of the blooms, show you what they look like, and then we'll jump over here to the mulberry tree that we looked at yesterday. Okay, this is one of our young mulberry trees that I showed you yesterday, and it's really disappointing. This mulberry blooms later in the year, so it generally doesn't get any frost on it or any hard freezes on it. This hard freeze is just destroyed this tree. I'll bring the camera closer and show you, but all these leaves, you can tell they've been frozen, kind of like if you put lettuce in a freezer and let it freeze, how it just gets that mushy feeling. Well, that's the way almost all these leaves are. I don't know about the blooms yet, but every one of these blooms, or a large chunk of them, look pretty rough. The leaves definitely do. It's very disappointing to see this, but the leaves, you can tell they're starting to turn black. They're almost transparent where they got froze last night. Now, we did have about a 7 mile an hour wind pretty much all night, 7 to 10 miles an hour, and usually that helps. Even big orchards, big growers, they'll put big wind machines in their orchards to try to keep the frost off of them. But even with that light wind that we had all night, the mulberry tree just did not do well at all. Like I said, I'll have to wait a few days, maybe even a couple weeks to see whether the little mulberries on here develop or not. But the leaves are definitely gonna fall off. I'll come back and video this tree next week sometime so you can see. I would say all the leaves that are sprouted out right now will be brown in a few days to a week, because there's definitely freeze damage. Like I said, they're just soft and mushy. It just makes me sick to tell you the truth, but that's part of it. You know, it just happens that way. That's Mother Nature. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. But I'll grab the camera, give you a closer shot and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, hopefully the camera's focused pretty good. But you can see how all these leaves are wilted down. The little mulberries even wilted down right there. There's already black tips on it. All over this tree is the same way. The leaves are curled and black, the tips of them. So that tells me that this tree had a hard freeze on it last night, and most of those leaves are probably going to fall off. Let's go out to the main orchard and look at some of those fruit trees. All right, this is our young peach tree we looked at yesterday. Most of the blooms on it look pretty good. Some of them are wilted down. You can see that one has some black on the top of it, on the top of the bloom itself. Most of them look pretty good. I did open a couple of these blooms up. This bloom here, you can see it's very black all the way around. And so I peeled back to look at the ovary inside the bloom to see whether it was black yet, and I really can't tell. This one's still whitish green, and I don't know if you've ever done this before, but and if the camera will focus on it, but this is the ovary inside of the flower. And what'll happen in a few days, if these blooms are dead, that'll be black inside of it. It'll be black or a dark brown color. So that means that that bloom is dead, that fruit will not produce. But if in a few days I go and check some of these and they're white or greenish white, and that I can feel the seed inside of it, which this one I can already feel the seed inside there. So that means that it was pollinated before this freeze, so it's already set the seed. If it's white or greenish white, then it's in good shape. Then I know that that's gonna produce peaches this year. Of course, most of the time you only want 1 or 2 peaches on each branch, so that way you don't overload it. And there's still some blooms that are setting on this peach tree. So truly, we should be okay this year for peaches. Like I said, by next week, I'll know for sure. I'll be able to come out here and be able to pull back some of these, check the ovaries on the flower, and see whether the peaches are gonna make it or not. Of course, we come back after it blooms and it sets peaches and we see the little peaches come out, and we cut all those off to where we only have 1 or 2 per branch anyhow, because you don't want to overload your trees. But so far, this tree looks good. I don't see any wilted leaves. I see a few wilted blooms on it, which, like I said, with the duration that we had last night, this is a wilted bloom here. You can see the whole top of that one is black. But with the duration of the cold that we had last night, that's what concerns me the most, that it was so cold for so long. But luckily, like I said before, we had a light breeze blowing, a 7-mile-an-hour wind most of the night. So that should have helped to protect these trees and protect the blooms on them. Okay, this is the black Tartarian cherry we looked at yesterday. Yesterday, all these blooms were opened up nice and pretty and white. And this morning, you can see a lot of them are wilted on the top, especially on these outside edges. The tops of the blooms are wilted down. So that tells me that these blooms froze. This bloom right here, you can see it's already turned brown on it. The whole bloom is turned brown. The only saving grace with this cherry tree is, like I told you in yesterday's video, I saw bees pollinating this. And if I open this up and look inside, there's a little seed already forming inside, which I don't know if the camera blooms that were open have already been pollinated. So with my experience in the past, once that happens, generally that'll produce fruit. Now, not always. So we'll wait, just like everything else, for a few days, and we'll come back and check this. Now, all these blooms that aren't opened up yet, they feel fine. So they should continue to open up and hopefully not die off real quick. We'll see over the next few days and the next few weeks. Another thing I've noticed with this cherry tree, it doesn't have many leaves on it, But what leaves are out, the tips of them look like that they're gonna turn black or a little bit brown, but the whole leaf isn't froze. Where on the mulberry tree, the entire leaf was froze. You could tell the leaf had been frozen. So this one, some of the tips, especially on the outside limbs, look a little bit brown, like the tips got froze. But all these other blooms that are closed, hopefully they were closed enough and they were protected enough that they didn't freeze. So we'll find out in the next few days. Over the next week, we'll keep an eye on these trees, and I'll make another video next week and show you where these trees are at. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video, especially when we do the updates on these fruit trees. And as always, thanks for watching.